The microphones were too close. I could hear my own breath echoing back through them, amplified and distorted, like the sound of someone else confessing. The flag behind me rustled once under the air vent, its shadow sliding across the blue curtain like an accusation. I straightened my back and looked at the room. A sea of faces, half hidden by cameras and glass. The flashbulbs flickered white. The air smelled faintly of metal and coffee grounds, the scent of sleepless men waiting for history to happen. This statement is not sanctioned by the Department of Defense, I said. The microphone hissed faintly as it caught my voice. But it's sanctioned by my conscience. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A cough. The click-click of camera shutters began, rapid and mechanical. Somewhere in the front row, my father sat rigid. His metals gleamed under the artificial light. Beside him, my uncle leaned toward my brother and whispered, "She's destroying us." I didn't flinch. The words were meant to wound, but they landed like dust on armor already cracked. The truth doesn't destroy families, I said. Lies do. The sound hung in the air, not echoing, not fading. It just stayed, heavy as smoke. My father's jaw clenched. For a moment, his eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Disbelief, then fury, then the faint tremor of shame. He whispered something to my brother, but I didn't hear. I was past hearing. All I could feel was the cool vibration of the microphone under my fingers and the air pressing warm against my uniform collar. I had worn this uniform for 8 years. It had been my second skin, my shield, and sometimes my prison. Now it was evidence. I continued speaking, voice even, steady, because that's what he had taught me. Control every word, command every silence. Except this silence belonged to me. Reporters raised their hands, shouting questions I couldn't yet answer. The press officer gestured for calm, but no one obeyed. Somewhere, the flag behind me fluttered again. The movement drew my eyes. That red, white, and blue cloth, the same one that had hung in every room of my childhood, watching me obey. Now it watched me revolt. Then came the 12 footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My father stood and walked toward the exit. Each step sounded like a countdown. 1, 2, 3. The kind of march you can't stop once it starts. He didn't look back. The door closed with a soft click. And that was how the Lin dynasty began to fall. Not with a scandal, but with the sound of a man leaving the truth behind him. The next morning, the newspapers called it a betrayal. Daughter of decorated general denounces family legacy. They quoted my words, but not my reasons. They printed my photo beside my father's, like a before and after of honor. I watched the coverage alone, sitting on the floor of my apartment. The television's glow turned the flag on my wall into a ghost. That was how all of this began, with a microphone, a flag, and the decision to finally speak. The hum of my apartment heater filled the silence. I hadn't slept. My coffee was cold. Every hour since the conference, I'd replayed the same moment. His eyes, his silence, the look that said, "You've broken something that can't be fixed." But he was wrong. It wasn't broken. It was finally visible. That night, as the city lights pulsed against the windows, I found myself thinking of the first time I ever saw him angry. And that's when the past returned. Not gently, but like a file opening without permission. I was 9 years old the first time I learned the cost of speaking. It was a humid afternoon in Quantico. My father had just come home from a training rotation overseas. The house smelled of brass polish and starch, the same scent that clung to his uniforms. He stood in the living room, aligning medals on his display shelf. I had asked him once why they had to be polished every Sunday. "Because dust disrespects sacrifice," he'd said. That day he was quiet, eyes fixed on one medal in particular, a bronze star with a scratch across the surface. I reached out to touch it. "Don't," he said sharply. I froze. I just wanted to see it. He turned toward me, voice low but heavy. "You don't touch what you don't understand." Then he bent down, meeting my eyes. "Loyalty," or he said, "is the highest honor." That was his gospel. It was the first commandment of the Lin household. Even then, I understood that loyalty didn't mean truth. It meant silence, Dinner was always the same: 4 chairs, 4 silences. My mother passed dishes without words, her eyes darting between us like a translator trapped between languages. My brother Noah, 2 years older, filled the space with stories about cadet training and drills. My father listened to him with pride. When he spoke to me, his tone softened, but there was a distance to it, like he was addressing a reflection rather than a daughter. "You're quiet," he'd say. "That's good. Quiet people think before they act." I wanted to ask him if quiet people were allowed to dream. I never did. The sound of silverware filled the room, a metallic rhythm of control. Somewhere in that rhythm, I learned to breathe in time with his expectations. Every photo on our walls showed men in uniform: Grandfather Lin in Vietnam, father in the Gulf, Noah already being groomed to join the Navy. I was the anomaly: too still, too bookish, too internal. At 16, I entered the academy out of obligation, not ambition. Father's salute at my induction ceremony was crisp, perfect. He looked proud, but his pride felt conditional, fragile, like a contract with clauses I didn't understand yet. Years later, when Noah graduated with honors, the mayor attended his ceremony. Cameras flashed, speeches flowed, the Lin name gleamed again. That night, at the family dinner, my father toasted, "To the true continuation of our legacy." He didn't look at me. I smiled, raised my glass, and said nothing. The room smelled of whiskey and old pride. Outside, the wind pressed against the flag on the porch until it tore slightly at one corner. No one noticed. When I finally joined military intelligence, Father called it a safe path. Not combat, not leadership, a place for quiet people. He said, "Information is only power if you know when not to use it." At the time, I thought he was teaching me discretion. I didn't realize he was teaching me to bury the truth. For years, I followed the rule. I served quietly. I stayed invisible. Until the night I found the file. The night I realized his lessons had never been about honor, only control. The memory faded. I was back in the apartment, sitting in the half-dark, the flag behind me still swaying slightly from the heater's current. The air smelled like dust and coffee and inevitability. Tomorrow, I knew, the story would no longer be mine to tell. The world would dissect it, twist it, weaponize it. But at least it would exist. That was enough. Then came a knock on the door. Soft, cautious, but familiar. Noah. He stood in uniform, the brim of his cap dripping rain onto the floor. His eyes were dark, searching. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "I've been alone for years," and I answered. He hesitated, glancing at the television, where my face was frozen mid-sentence. "Dad's furious. Uncle Henry's already talking to the press. They'll crush you, Ava." "I know." He looked like he wanted to say more, but couldn't. Instead, he whispered, "He's not the man you think he is." I think I know exactly who he is. The silence between us was heavy. The flag on the wall rippled once as the heater clicked off. Noah looked at it, then at me. "You always wanted to fix things. You just never asked what happens after." I said, "After what?" "After you win." Then he left. The door shut softly. The echo lingered longer than it should have. I stood there, staring at the microphone on my desk. Its metal body reflected the dim light. An instrument of truth or betrayal, depending on who you asked. I ran my fingers over its cold surface. It was heavier than I remembered. When I finally sat down, I turned it toward me and whispered, "I'm not finished yet." And I wasn't. Because the press conference had been only the opening shot. The real war, the one inside the family, inside the system, had just begun. The day my father taught me to march, the air smelled like gun oil and pine. I was 11. He had cleared the driveway, laid out a chalk line, and told me, "Feet on the mark, eyes forward." His shadow fell long across the pavement. He tapped his boot twice. Again. The sun was brutal that afternoon, hot enough to blur the asphalt. Sweat stung my eyes, but I didn't dare wipe it away. The cadence of his voice was a drumbeat, steady and merciless. Again. The sound of my boots echoed through the neighborhood, an obedient rhythm learned too young. By the time we went inside, I couldn't feel my legs. My mother handed me a glass of water, her movements soft, practiced. She didn't speak. She never interrupted his lessons. That night, when I sat on my bed, I heard him in the next room, polishing his metals. The faint scrape of cloth against metal became a lullaby I couldn't unhear. That was how I learned that love in our house was measured in endurance. Our dining table was a war zone of manners. Every Sunday, we ate beneath the same chandelier, the one that hummed faintly whenever the air conditioner kicked in. My mother would serve in silence. My father would ask Noah about his training scores. When it came to me, he'd nod once and say, "You've always been a quiet one." It was meant as approval. I learned to take it as such. The clink of silverware became our common language. Even laughter had rank in that house. Noah's loud, mine restricted to polite smiles. My earliest memory of pride was his hand on my shoulder the day I passed the basic ethics test at the academy. "You think like a soldier," he'd said. It felt like sunlight on cold skin. But his praise was conditional. It only existed when I mirrored his discipline, not my own mind. The first time I questioned him, really questioned him, was over dinner when I was 15. "Why do metals matter more than people?" I asked. The question silenced the room, silenced the use. The sound of the clock on the wall suddenly grew deafening. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "Because metals don't lie." Then he stood, placed his napkin on the table, and left without another word. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. "Don't provoke him, Ava," she whispered. "He believes in order. Order keeps him safe." Safe from what? She never said. That was when I realized, in our family, truth was an intruder. When I was 19, Noah was accepted into the Navy's Special Warfare Program. Father celebrated like it was a coronation. The neighbors came, reporters too. The Lin legacy continued. I remember standing by the staircase holding the flag he'd given Noah, folded perfectly into a triangle. My father noticed and said, "Hold it higher." So I did. My arms burned. He smiled, satisfied. That night, when everyone had gone home, I found the flag still in my hands. It smelled like dust and sweat and something older, a history that didn't belong to me. I folded it back, tight and precise, and placed it in his study. He never thanked me. He didn't have to. Gratitude wasn't part of the code. When I joined military intelligence, the house barely reacted. No party, no cameras, just a quiet dinner. My father raised his glass and said, "Our family has always served where it matters most." In silence. I smiled, but something in me recoiled. My mother avoided my eyes. Noah laughed too loud, trying to fill the emptiness. That night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "She's not like us," Noah said. "She'll learn," Father replied. I wanted to ask, learn what? How to bury questions. How to turn silence into a virtue. But I stayed in my room, polishing my own boots, repeating the ritual that had once made me feel safe. The sound of the brush against leather, steady, rhythmic, was the only proof that I still belonged. At the academy, loyalty was a subject. They made us write essays on it. I filled pages with quotes from generals and philosophers, but none of it felt true. To me, loyalty was simpler. It was the quiet ache of wanting to be seen by the people who claimed to know you best. Once during a field lecture, a commander said, "Honor without truth is theater." I wrote that down, underlined it twice. When I returned home that weekend, I found my father in his study, reading old mission reports. "Do you think honor needs truth?" I asked him. He didn't look up. "Honor is truth," he said flatly. "But what if truth destroys honor?" He finally looked at me then, eyes sharp as razors. "Then you protect honor first. That's the soldier's duty." I didn't argue. But that night, I wrote in my notebook, if honor is built on lies, who does it serve? It would be years before I'd have the courage to answer that question. The Lin estate was a museum of victories. Every hallway framed in photographs of salutes, ceremonies, medals, plaques. The smell of wax polish and cedar filled the air. My mother used to joke that the house could pass inspection at any hour. But beneath the gleam, there were cracks, unspoken, unseen. When my grandfather died, my father didn't cry. He stood at the funeral with perfect posture, hand over heart, eyes on the flag draped over the coffin. After the service, he said, "We carry the weight now." He meant the name, not the grief. Later, alone in the house, I unfolded the funeral program. The last line read, "Duty before comfort." I didn't know if that was meant to honor him or haunt us. Noah called once from deployment, voice buzzing with static. "Dad says you're doing admin work now." "I'm reviewing field intelligence." He laughed. "Still the quiet one, huh?" I forced a smile he couldn't see. Someone has to keep the records straight. Records don't win wars, Ava. Maybe not, but lies lose them. He didn't answer. The line crackled. Then silence. Even distance couldn't make us sound honest. Sometimes I dream of those dinners. The sound of forks against plates, the soft hum of the chandelier. In the dream, I try to speak, but the air feels thick, like moving through water. My father's face is there, half in shadow. He raises a hand and I fall silent. Then I wake, always to the same sound, the rustle of the flag outside my window. It's strange how certain sounds never stop following you. When I was 28, I received my first commendation for excellence in analysis. I mailed the certificate home. A week later, my father sent a text. "Proud of you. Keep it quiet." I stared at those words for a long time. They summed up everything I'd ever been to him. A secret source of pride, hidden behind public legacy. That night, I stood in my office, the room lit only by the monitor glow. My reflection stared back from the black screen. For the first time, I saw not a soldier, not a daughter, but something else. A witness waiting to speak. The file that would change everything was still months away. But I could already feel it coming, like thunder behind distant clouds. When it arrived, I would be ready. Not because of what he taught me, but because of what his silence had forced me to learn. And that was the truth of it. My father built his world on obedience. My mother survived hers through quiet denial. Noah escaped his through glory. And me? I stayed behind long enough to hear the silence crack. I didn't know then that the sound of that first fracture would echo through the rest of my life. But it did. And when it finally split open, it sounded like a name I no longer wanted to carry. The archive always hummed like a living thing. Low, constant, mechanical. The kind of sound you stopped hearing after an hour until the night it changed your life. That night, I stayed late. Everyone else had gone home. The glow of the monitors bathed the room in pale blue. Outside, the base was silent. Just the wind brushing against steel doors and the distant buzz of a security drone. The air smelled of dust, paper, and the faint ozone of overworked servers. I wasn't supposed to be there. My clearance allowed access to field files for cross-reference audits, not mission archives. But I had been ordered to reconcile strike reports for Operation Rainvow, and the system search had brought up an anomaly, a file nested deep inside a directory labeled Iron Kite. Its timestamp was wrong, 2 years after its closure. Same authorization tag as my father's last command. I hesitated for a long moment, hand hovering over the mouse. Then training took over. Trace, verify, classify. My badge chimed faintly against my chest as I leaned forward. Password locked. Of course it was. I tried the generic override code. Denied. Then the internal ethics override, one we were told to use only in cases of imminent threat. Access granted. The screen filled with coordinates, signatures, and a playback file. The cursor blinked, waiting. I clicked. A static burst, then grainy drone footage. Desert terrain. 6 figures moving near a compound. The camera zoomed in. Heat signatures glowing white. A voice said, "Target confirmed. Command authorization pending." Another voice, calm, firm, unmistakable. My father's. "They're not marked civilian?" Pause. "No, sir. Insurgents confirmed." Then another voice, older, polished, my Uncle Henry's. "Execute. Adjust the report if necessary. We can't have another scandal." And then my father's again. "Do it." The screen flashed white. The compound erupted. Debris scattered like ash. Then the silence. Even through the speakers, I could hear my own pulse. The playback ended. I sat there, staring at the timestamp. The operation was listed as confirmed hostile neutralization, but the coordinates matched a location I knew, a refugee corridor flagged 3 months before as civilian safe zone. I replayed the clip twice, then 3 times. Each time I hoped I'd misheard the voices. Each time, the same. That's when my hands began to shake. I saved the file onto a portable drive, encrypted it, labeled it as environmental surveillance data. The metal casing felt cold in my palm, heavier than it should have been. The servers hummed on, indifferent. I looked around the empty room, rows of screens blinking like unblinking eyes. For years, I'd believed data was neutral, that truth lived quietly inside numbers. But that night, I realized data could bleed. When I left, the corridor lights flickered. A janitor passed me, nodding, pushing his cart. I nodded back, afraid he'd somehow see what I carried. Outside, the night air hit like ice. I walked fast across the tarmac toward the lot. The flag over the base entrance moved faintly in the wind. For the first time, it didn't look like protection. It looked like a witness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the drive in front of me. The coffee went cold twice. The city beyond my window was dark and motionless. At 3 a.m, I called my father. He answered on the second ring. His voice was groggy, irritated. "Ava?" "I found something," I said. "Operation Iron Kite. The strike logs, they were falsified. The audio..." His tone sharpened instantly. "Where did you see that?" "In the archive. Dad, the coordinates..." "Stop. Delete it." I froze. "You knew?" "Ava," he said, voice low, measured, dangerous. "You're not built to understand what men in command must do." There it was again. That sentence that turned morality into rank. My throat tightened. "This isn't command, Dad, it's murder." He exhaled, slow. "You think truth wins wars?" "I think truth ends them." He didn't respond, just silence. Then a soft click. He'd hung up. The dial tone felt like a verdict. The next morning, I was called into headquarters. 2 men in suits waited. No insignia. "Captain Lin, your clearance has been suspended pending internal review," one of them said. "For what reason?" "Protocol breach." The words sounded clean, bureaucratic, the kind that leave no fingerprints. They escorted me out. My ID badge beeped red at every checkpoint. The same badge my father had pinned on my first day. By the time I reached my car, my access was revoked, my inbox erased, my credentials dead. That was the military's way of saying you don't exist. That night, there was a knock on my door. I knew before I opened it who it would be. My Uncle Henry. He wore civilian clothes, a gray suit too smooth for someone who'd once worn stars. His cologne hit first, strong, expensive, synthetic calm. He walked in without waiting for permission. "You've made a mess," he said. I didn't answer. He placed an envelope on the counter. The weight of it made a sound. Soft. Final. "For your future," he said. "For your silence." I stared at it. "You're bribing me?" "I'm protecting you and your father. You think this world forgives whistleblowers? You'll lose everything." I stepped closer. "I already have." He sighed, feigning sadness. "You're naive. You think truth stands on its own. It doesn't. It needs handlers, context, power. We built all of this to protect people like you." I felt something in me harden. "No, you built it to protect yourselves." He tilted his head, studying me like a problem he couldn't yet solve. "Then you'll never wear that uniform again." When he left, the smell of his cologne lingered, sharp and chemical, like the aftertaste of deceit. 2 hours later, my brother called. His voice was hushed. "What did you do, Ava?" "I told the truth." "They'll destroy you. You're fighting people who built the walls around you." "Then I'll climb over." He hesitated. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." There was silence on the line, then softly, "I wish I was brave like you." Before I could answer, the call ended. I sat for a long time in the dark. The drive lay on the table, small and cold. The flag on my wall hung limp, its edge brushing against the heater vent. It made a faint fluttering sound. Heartbeat quiet, but constant. I opened my laptop and scrolled through my encrypted contacts. At the bottom of the list was one name: Major Leah Chen, International Tribunal Liaison. She picked up after 2 rings. Ava, it's been years. I need help, I said, off record. A pause. How bad? Bad enough to bury all of us. Her voice softened. Send me the file. Use the diplomatic channel. I can't. Not yet. They're watching. Then come to me. Midnight, Embassy Row. The rain had started by the time I reached her apartment. The city lights fractured on the wet pavement, streaks of red and gold. Leah opened the door before I knocked. She looked tired, alert, the kind of calm that comes from long exposure to danger. We didn't speak much. She led me to her desk, where 3 monitors glowed with cascading lines of code. I handed her the drive. Our fingers brushed, cold metal between them. She slotted it in. The data appeared. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, Jesus, Ava. I know. This isn't just evidence, it's a warhead. I'm done following orders. I said, I'm giving them the truth. Leah's fingers flew across the keyboard. Then we'll do it clean. The tribunal servers, 3 relays, no trace. We worked for hours, re-encrypting, routing, wiping metadata. The hum of her equipment filled the silence. The air smelled faintly of jasmine tea and ozone. When the upload began, she said quietly, once it's out there, you can't take it back. I don't want to. The progress bar inched forward. 17%, 43%, 82%, then complete. Leah leaned back, exhaling. It's done. Outside, the rain eased. The first thin line of dawn touched the windows. I walked to the balcony. The flag above the embassy across the street fluttered in the gray light. For the first time, I felt its movement as permission, not control. Leah joined me. You know they'll come after you. They already have. What will you do now? I looked at the horizon, where the clouds glowed faintly with morning. Wait for the world to listen. And when the sun finally rose, the city seemed to pause, as if it too knew something irreversible had begun. The footage hit the networks 48 hours later. It spread faster than fire, faster than fear. By noon, every major channel was looping the same clip. Grainy drone footage, the flash of impact, the voices that had once been gospel in my house. We can't have another scandal. Do it. And then the silence. That terrible echoing silence that always followed obedience. The anchors spoke my name like a headline, not a person. Captain Ava Lin, intelligence officer, whistleblower. Some called me courageous. Some called me unstable. All of them called me traitor in their own polite way. The government issued a statement within hours. An internal review is underway. It was the same phrase my father had used when I was a child and asked why the world was unfair. Some things take time, he'd said. We fix them quietly. This wasn't quiet anymore. The phone rang without pause. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, reporters, lawyers, soldiers who wanted to thank me or warn me. By the second night, I turned the phone off. The knock came soon after. It was Noah. He stood in the doorway, soaked through, uniform cap in his hands. Ava, what did you do? His voice trembled. Not with anger, but something worse. Fear. I told the truth. You exposed him. You exposed all of us. I exposed what we did. His eyes darted to the flag hanging over my desk. You think that thing forgives betrayal? I almost laughed. It's a flag, Noah. It doesn't forgive or condemn. It remembers. He flinched. You don't understand what you've started. Maybe not, but I understand what silence cost us. He stared at me for a long time, rainwater dripping onto the floor. Then he whispered, They're going to court-martial you. I know. Then why do you look calm? Because they finally have to listen. When he left, the apartment felt smaller. The air smelled of wet wool and electricity. I could still hear his footsteps down the hall, fading into nothing. The television flickered. My father's face filled the screen, recorded earlier that day. He was standing at a podium, hands clasped behind his back. My daughter is mistaken, he said. The Lins have served this country for 3 generations with honor. We will continue to do so. He didn't deny it. He just shifted the definition of honor. That night, I packed a small bag. Passport, documents, the original encrypted drive, a burner phone. The city outside was restless. Sirens somewhere far off, wind pressing against windows, the low hum of a world trying to recalibrate itself. I took the metro to Leah's apartment. The train car was almost empty. A child sat across from me, humming a tune while his mother dozed. The sound was gentle, unbothered. It made me ache for something I'd never had, peace without vigilance. When I arrived, Leah was waiting by the window, watching the glow of news helicopters circling the capital. "It's chaos out there," and she said, "Oh, I know. You're trending in 3 languages. Good. Let them translate guilt properly." She almost smiled. "You always did have a poetic streak." Then more quietly, "They'll retaliate, Ava. This isn't over." "I don't want it to be over," I said. "Not until they're forced to answer." She gestured toward the table where a laptop was open, the tribunal servers still connected. "There's more we can do. We can send it directly to the Ethics Oversight Committee. Unredacted. They'll call it treason." "They already did," I nodded. "Then we finish it." We worked through the night again. Leah's fingers moved fast, typing commands, rerouting files through secure relays. My hands shook slightly as I entered authorization codes from memory, numbers I wasn't supposed to know but did. The room was warm from the machines. The smell of overheated plastic mixed with her jasmine tea again, oddly comforting. At one point, she paused and looked at me. "When this is over, what will you do?" I stared at the screen, where data lines streamed like veins across the monitor. "Find a new way to serve." "You think they'll let you?" "They don't get to decide." The final file uploaded. The confirmation message blinked once. Transmission complete. Leah leaned back. "It's in their hands now." I exhaled. For the first time in days, my lungs felt full. We sat there in silence for a while. The hum of the equipment filled the room, steady and low. Then Leah said, "You know your father will testify. He'll try to frame this as an act of confusion, not corruption." "I know." "You ready to face him?" "I've been facing him my whole life." 2 days later, I received the summons. United States Department of Defense Tribunal, Ethics Inquiry, Case 47B, Operation Iron Kite. Hearing scheduled, Monday, 0900 hours. Location, Pentagon Main Chamber. Noah sent one message that night. "Please don't show up." I didn't reply. On Sunday, I went home. The Lin estate was quiet, the driveway empty. The flag on the porch hung limp, still carrying the tear from Noah's celebration years ago. Inside, the house smelled of polish and rain. My mother sat in the living room, television muted, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't stand when I entered. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." Her voice was tired, brittle. "He hasn't left his study in 3 days." I glanced toward the closed door at the end of the hall. "I just came for one thing." She looked at me, not angry, just hollow. "You think truth will save you?" "It's not supposed to." Her eyes glistened. "Then why do it?" I hesitated. "Because if no one tells it, it dies." She turned away as if the words themselves hurt. I walked to the study. The door was half open. My father sat at his desk, still in uniform, the light from the desk lamp painting harsh lines across his face. He didn't look up when I entered. "You're going to lose everything," he said. "Then I'll start over." He sighed, a sound heavy enough to fill the room. "You think this will cleanse you? You'll destroy your family name. Maybe it's time it stopped being a shield." He finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, weary. "You were supposed to be the quiet one." I was, until silence became complicity. Neither of us moved. The only sound was the ticking of the old mantel clock. Steady, merciless. Then he said softly, "You've always been just like me." "No, Dad, I'm what you could have been." When I left, the sky was beginning to lighten. I stood on the porch, watching the flag stir faintly in the wind. Tomorrow, the world would see us both stripped bare. One man who hid behind loyalty, one woman who learned its price. The wind picked up. The torn edge of the flag fluttered once, then twice. For a moment, it almost sounded like applause. The morning of the hearing, the air in Washington tasted metallic, like rain on copper. The city was gray, expectant. Every step I took toward the Pentagon echoed too loudly, as though the marble itself remembered who used to walk beside me. The flag at the gate moved in the wind, once sharply, then held its breath. I stopped beneath it for a moment. I used to salute it automatically. This time I looked at it and whispered, "You'll hear everything today." Inside, the hall was colder than I remembered. Security scanned me twice. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, that faint electric sound that always accompanied power. In the tribunal chamber, the ceiling arched like a cathedral. Cameras lined the back wall. Rows of uniforms, suits, and journalists packed the benches. The smell of polished oak and stale coffee blended into something sterile, ceremonial. When they called my name, I rose. Captain Ava Lin. The microphones amplified it, stripped of warmth, just syllables and rank. I stepped forward, the click of my boots steady against the floor, and then I saw him. My father sat at the defense table, posture perfect, medals aligned, eyes forward. Every inch of him still looked like command. Only the tremor in his jaw betrayed the fracture. Beside him sat my Uncle Henry, immaculate in a dark suit, the same smug calm that had haunted me at my apartment. His gaze met mine for a moment, cold recognition. The tribunal chair spoke. "Captain Lin, you're aware that your actions have resulted in international exposure of classified data?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you stand by those actions?" "I do." "Even though they implicate your own family?" "Especially because they do." A murmur ran through the room, a low ripple of unease. Somewhere, a camera shutter snapped. I could feel my father's eyes on me. I didn't look back. They called the first exhibit, Operation Iron Kite, Field Authorization Recording. The projection screen dropped from the ceiling. The lights dimmed. Static. Then the footage. The grainy black and white image of a village. The audio hissed, then cleared. My father's voice. "They're not marked as civilian." Another. My uncle. "Execute. Adjust the report if necessary." The explosion bloomed silently on screen. A collective intake of breath filled the room. And then his voice again. "We can't have another scandal. Do it." The sound hung there, long after the video ended. The lights came up. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in the eyes of men who had never admitted it existed. The chair cleared her throat. "General Lin, do you wish to respond?" My father stood slowly. The rows behind him straightened unconsciously, muscle memory responding to hierarchy. He said, "My daughter has misunderstood context. War demands truth," I interrupted. His head snapped toward me. "Dos, you shamed your bloodline." The words cracked through the chamber like a shot. I stepped forward. The microphone caught my voice, calm and sharp as a blade. "No, father, I cleaned it." The sound system buzzed for a second, amplifying the silence that followed. No one moved. The chair glanced toward the screen again, her face pale. "The evidence speaks clearly," she said finally. "The tribunal will recess for deliberation." But no one heard her. Everyone was still looking at him. The man who had taught a generation that loyalty meant silence. He looked at me as if I'd torn something sacred out of him. Maybe I had. When the hearing resumed, they read the findings. Operation Iron Kite. Falsification confirmed. Command signatures verified. Oversight failure of the highest degree. The chair's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she turned the pages. Effective immediately, General Thomas Lin is relieved of all duties. Admiral Henry Lin is suspended pending trial. A gasp rippled through the crowd. My uncle rose, face drained of color. "This is absurd. You can't—" But the chair cut him off. "Sit down, Admiral." He did. Slowly, then to me. "Captain Lin, your actions will be reviewed under whistleblower protection, pending reinstatement." Her eyes softened. "This tribunal owes you acknowledgement." I nodded once. I didn't do it for acknowledgement. From somewhere in the back of the chamber, applause began. One person, hesitant, then another, then a wave. Not loud, not chaotic, just steady, deliberate. But it wasn't applause for me. It was for the idea that truth could still stand in a room like this. Then something happened I hadn't expected. Officers, colonels, majors, cadets began to rise. One by one, a stand, not commanded, not rehearsed. Even the cameras fell silent. I felt the air shift. The sound of 1,000 uniforms brushing against fabric as they rose together. My father didn't move. He sat frozen, staring straight ahead. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was the weight of what it cost him to stay seated. After the adjournment, the hallway outside was chaos. Reporters shouting, flashbulbs flaring. I pushed through, Leah beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "No," I answered. "The truth did." We stepped out into the courtyard. The wind was cold, slicing through the noise. The flag above the entrance whipped violently, alive. I stopped, looked up. The same flag that had watched me swear allegiance when I was 21 now watched me break its silence. "You built your legacy on silence," I whispered to the sky. "I built mine on truth." Leah stood beside me, her expression unreadable. Then she said softly, "He heard you." I nodded. "He'll deny it until the end." But he heard me. As we walked toward the gates, the reporters' voices grew distant. The only sound left was the flag snapping in the wind, each crack of fabric like punctuation on the end of an era. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward it, the cost, the consequence, the clean, unflinching air of truth. The tribunal's verdict reverberated through Washington like a controlled detonation, too disciplined to call chaos, too powerful to call order. By the next morning, every newspaper carried my father's face on the front page. The same photograph that had once hung in classrooms, posters, recruiting halls. The caption beneath it was only 3 words: "Legacy in question." I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to. The story had left the realm of journalism. It had become a myth being rewritten. That day, the Pentagon grounds were eerily quiet. Soldiers moved briskly, eyes forward, as if looking at me too long might be contagious. When I arrived at headquarters to sign the statement, verifying the chain of evidence, a junior officer escorted me down the hall. Her voice trembled slightly when she said, "Ma'am, I watched the hearing. My dad did too." I stopped walking. "And?" She swallowed. "He stood." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit harder than any medal I'd ever been given. Outside the hearing room, Leah waited. She looked exhausted but alive, the way people do after surviving a storm they weren't sure they'd outlast. "Ready for round 2?" she asked. "There's a round 2? Public Ethics Committee, civilian broadcast. You're giving a statement. Now? In an hour." I laughed, though it came out more like an exhale. "Guess the war never ends." Leah handed me a folder. Inside was my reinstatement form, stamped, signed, dated. My eyes caught the signature line. I froze. General Thomas Lin. "He signed it?" I asked quietly. "Before his resignation was finalized," Leah said. "He pushed it through the system himself." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The man who had called me a disgrace had also restored my name to the registry. Even in defeat, he was trying to control the narrative. Or maybe, just maybe, he was trying to understand it. I closed the folder. "He never could apologize in words," Leah's voice softened. "He did in ink." He did. An hour later, the broadcast room was packed. The podium gleamed under white lights, the same kind that had blinded me during my first press conference. A microphone stood ready, waiting like a test. I could see the flag behind it, backlit so that the fabric glowed. A halo of history and hypocrisy. A technician adjusted the microphone. "Sound check, Captain Lin?" "I think it's working." He smiled nervously and stepped back. The chairwoman of the ethics committee entered, took her seat, and nodded to me. "Captain Lin, the world is watching." "I know," I said. "They should." The cameras blinked red. Live broadcast. I began. "My name is Captain Ava Lin. My father taught me that loyalty is the highest honor. For a long time, I believed him. But I've learned that loyalty without truth isn't honor. It's obedience." The lights were hot against my face, but I didn't flinch. "War doesn't just take lives, it takes memory," It replaces facts with stories we can live with. Operation Iron Kite wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And I refused to let that decision disappear into silence. I glanced toward the audience seats. Among the observers, a familiar figure sat in the second row. Uniform pressed, cap in hand, eyes lowered. Noah. His presence steadied me. I know what they'll call me. Traitor. Disgrace. Whistleblower. But truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone willing to speak it. I took a breath. You built your legacy on silence. I built mine on truth. The words landed like a strike. The microphones caught every syllable, no tremor, no regret, and then nothing. And then no applause, no questions, just the sound of air. The silence was almost holy. Then, one by one, people rose. The senators, the officers, the aides. A stand. Slow, deliberate, collective. Not celebration. Recognition. Noah stood too, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in months. He didn't smile, didn't salute, just nodded once like an unspoken truce. Leah placed her hand on my shoulder. It's over, she whispered. I shook my head. No, it's beginning. After the broadcast, I found a quiet corner near the exit, away from the cameras. I pulled out my father's reinstatement letter again. The ink had bled slightly at the edge, as if written with a shaking hand. I read his name one last time, then folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Outside, the winter wind was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. The flag above the building whipped violently, snapping in the cold air. I looked up at it, letting the sound fill the silence. He signed my return, I said softly. He understood in the end. Leah joined me at the steps. He didn't need to agree to understand. I nodded. Maybe understanding was his way of surrendering. The sun was setting, low and red, washing the marble in gold. The flag caught the light, rippling like fire. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of authority. It felt like witness, alive, breathing, forgiving. Later that night, I sat alone at my desk, the room dark except for the small lamp. The microphone from the press room lay in front of me, unplugged, silent. I brushed my fingers over it, cool, smooth, lifeless now. It had carried the truth once. It didn't need to again. I closed my eyes and listened. Somewhere outside, the faint rustle of the flag. The same sound that had followed me through childhood drills, family dinners, tribunals, and confessions. Only now it didn't sound like command. It sounded like peace. The Senate chamber smelled of varnish and old paper, that scent of history pretending to be permanent. Rows of flags lined the marble walls, their edges motionless in the still air. The light that morning was cold, almost surgical, pouring through the high windows like judgment. I had been here before, years ago, as an observer in uniform. Back then, the place had felt sacred, untouchable. Now, it felt smaller, human, fallible, like a room that had finally learned to listen. I stood behind the witness table, facing the committee. Cameras lined the back wall again, their small red lights blinking patiently. My reinstated ID badge gleamed faintly under the fluorescent glow. It was strange. The same piece of plastic that had once defined me, then erased me, now carried my name again. But the weight of it felt different, lighter, earned. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Captain Lin, this hearing will record your recommendations for ethical oversight in command operations. Yes, ma'am. She leaned forward slightly. Before we begin, I'd like to thank you for your courage. Her voice trembled on the word courage. I could tell she'd practiced it. Courage, after all, is easy to pronounce when it belongs to someone else. Behind her, I saw a familiar figure in the upper gallery, Noah. Uniform pressed, posture perfect. The same quiet dignity our father once demanded, but now it belonged to him alone. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. I took a slow breath. The microphone in front of me hummed faintly, a sound I had come to recognize not as feedback, but as readiness. Senators, I began, truth is not a weapon. It's a mirror. Sometimes when you hold it up, the reflection isn't what you hope to see. I paused. The room listened. My family built a name on service. For generations, we believed silence was loyalty, but I've learned that silence can be the most dangerous form of betrayal. The words came easier than I expected, not because I'd rehearsed them, but because they were the only ones left to say. I'm not proud of what my father did, I continued, but I'm proud that in the end, even he chose to sign the truth. That signature was his way of acknowledging that honor isn't inherited, it's rebuilt. I let that sit. Then I looked at Noah. You can lose a name, I said softly, and still keep your honor. The chairwoman nodded slowly. History will remember that line, Captain. I didn't say it for history, I replied. I said it for anyone still afraid to speak. A long silence followed. No applause, no murmurs, just the faint rustle of papers and the steady hum of the cameras. Then, quietly, one of the staffers rose, then another, and another. A stand. Deliberate, slow, reverent. Noah stood too. His eyes met mine. Steady, unflinching. He raised his hand in a small salute, not of rank, but of respect. For the first time, I returned it. When the hearing adjourned, I stepped outside into the cold. The air was sharp enough to sting. The steps of the Capitol stretched before me, and above it all, the flag. Enormous, alive, snapping in the winter wind. I stopped halfway down the steps and looked up. It was the same flag that had watched me as a child on the driveway, as a soldier in training, as a whistleblower under interrogation. It had witnessed every silence, every word. Now it fluttered free in the pale sunlight, and for the first time, I saw it as it truly was. Not a symbol of obedience, but of endurance. Leah joined me at the bottom of the stairs. They'll name a policy after you, you know, she said. Policies fade, I replied. Principles don't. She smiled faintly. You really don't rest, do you? I rest when the truth doesn't need a microphone. We stood there for a long moment. The traffic hummed somewhere far off, a reminder that the world keeps moving, no matter who confesses. I thought of my father, of the metals, the polish, the quiet. Somewhere, in some quiet room, he was probably watching this. Maybe he'd turned off the sound, maybe not. Either way, he knew. The wind shifted. The flag cracked sharply once like a salute. They taught me loyalty, I whispered. I taught them what it means. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the window. The air smelled of frost and exhaust. The flag outside the building's entrance flickered weakly in the cold. I took my reinstated badge and placed it beside the microphone on my desk. The two objects gleamed faintly in the lamplight. The tools of silence and speech, resting side by side. Then I turned off the lamp. The city's glow filled the room instead, soft and endless. And for the first time in years, I felt quiet. Not the kind I was taught to keep, but the kind I'd fought to earn. The kind born of peace after truth. If you've ever been told to keep quiet for the sake of family honor, remember, silence protects power, not truth. Subscribe to Honor Life for more true spirit dramas where courage costs everything and dignity wins anyway.